I finally got revenge on the school bully who made my life miserable. I remember walking into Jefferson High on my first day like it was a disaster movie about to start. Freshman year, 17 years old, nervous as hell, and armed with nothing but a backpack and a notebook full of doodles I pretended were important. I wasn't new to moving around. My dad's job made us shift schools every couple of years, but there's something about starting high school that's a whole different level of terrifying. It's like stepping into a social ecosystem where everyone already knows their place, and you're the alien. I quickly realized my instincts were right. The cafeteria was a minefield. Tables were ruled by clans, jocks who wore confidence like armor, cheerleaders with their queen bee energy, and the groups that thrived on anonymity, invisible but ready to judge anyone who stepped out of line. And then there was Ryan Mitchell. Ryan was the kind of guy who didn't just enter a room, he claimed it. Broad shoulders, easy grin, hair that somehow looked perfect without trying. But the worst part, that grin wasn't friendly. It was calculating. It was the grin of someone who knew exactly what he could get away with and who his target would be. And somehow, the universe decided I was his. The first incident was brutal. In that unforgettable high school way, I had been walking to class, head down, trying to keep my hoodie on straight and avoid eye contact when I bumped into him. I didn't even see him. He was standing like some statue by the lockers. "Watch it, new kid," he said, voice dripping with fake sweetness. I mumbled an apology and tried to pass, but that grin widened. Then, like a scene from a nightmare, he shoved me backward. Not too hard. Just enough for a few people to notice. But it was the start. And of course, he laughed. A deep, echoing laugh that made everyone else in the hall look at me like I'd done something wrong. From that day, Ryan made it his personal mission to remind everyone that I was the easy target. It started small. Snide remarks in the hall, whispered jokes that I could hear but no one else would confirm. Then it escalated. Lunchroom humiliation. Assignments lost because of him, hallway shoves, the occasional trip when he knew teachers weren't looking. He had a knack for timing. Always when there were witnesses, but never when it could land him in trouble. I tried ignoring him at first. I thought, maybe if I don't react, he'll get bored. But ignoring him made it worse. He thrived on my discomfort. The more I froze, the more elaborate his schemes became. One day, I walked into English class only to find my desk covered in sticky notes with doodles of me. Ugly stick figures with captions like, "Mr. Loser." The class snickered. The teacher, oblivious, overlooked, didn't even notice. It was in moments like these that the internal struggle really set in. I felt powerless, completely invisible and yet painfully obvious. I hated the idea of feeling like a victim, but every time I tried to stand up, the laughter, the smirks, and Ryan's knowing grin reminded me just how alone I was. But then I started noticing patterns, little tells in his behavior, how he always timed his jokes when he knew someone would see, how he spoke over authority figures but not directly at them, the way he leaned back and smirked like he'd rehearsed his performance 1,000 times. That's when I started documenting. I know it sounds weird, like something a paranoid person would do, but I needed proof. I started keeping a little journal, noting every incident, the time, witnesses, even what Ryan was wearing. I swear, sometimes it mattered because his confidence seemed to shift depending on who was around. I also started taking subtle videos with my phone during lunch or passing periods. Messages, emails, social media interactions, every little thing that could be used later. I didn't tell anyone. Not my parents, not my teachers. They just say, ignore him, he'll grow out of it, or it's just high school. They didn't get it. And frankly, I didn't trust them to handle it. Eventually, I did find a small support circle. There was Mr. Allen, my history teacher, late 40s, coffee-stained shirts, and a permanent weary smile. He noticed how Ryan treated me once and pulled me aside after class. "Ethan, I see what's happening," he said quietly, handing me a notebook. "Use this. Write it down. Protect yourself." That small act of acknowledgement was huge. Not a solution, but at least a start. And then there was Maya, a quiet senior who had been through her own version of high school hell. She didn't talk much, but she gave me that subtle nod in the hall when Ryan tried to humiliate me. It was the kind of recognition that said, "I see you. You're not completely alone." I clung to that small thread of hope. By the time winter came, I was a shell of the nervous freshman who had entered in September. My confidence was low, my social skills underdeveloped, and yet something inside me had started to harden. I began watching Ryan the way a chess player watches an opponent. Every shove, every insult, every laugh. Predictable, repeatable, exploitable. The first major turning point happened during the winter pep rally. I tried to stay under the radar, sitting near the back, avoiding the jock tables, hoping Ryan wouldn't notice. Of course he did. He decided that today, the new kid would become the entertainment. It started with a whisper. I felt the laughter before I heard it. He tripped me as I walked up to the stage for some mandatory activity, sending me sprawling across the gym floor. The entire school erupted. Kids pointing, laughing, chanting. Somebody yelled "loser," and the echo went on for what felt like eternity. My face burned, my hand scraped against the floor, and my pride, well, I think it stayed in the corner of that gym for a while. I wanted to cry. I wanted to run. But something unexpected happened. Amid the chaos, a few students, Maya and a couple of her friends, clapped for me as I got up. Small, but noticeable. And Mr. Allen, He was standing at the edge, shaking his head, mouthing, "Keep your head up." That day, after hours of scribbling in my journal and reviewing videos I'd taken secretly, I realized something. Ryan wasn't just a bully. He was arrogant, reckless, predictable in ways that could be used against him. And for the first time, I felt a spark of something dangerous, something thrilling. I could fight back, and I would. I started to think about strategy. Not physical fights, that would never work, but social, psychological, and eventually personal strategy. Every joke he made, every shove, every snicker in the hall became a piece of data. Every detail recorded, cataloged, and analyzed. And slowly I began to feel a shift inside myself, from victim to observer, planner, potentially one day the one in control. That's how a freshman year ended for me. Humiliation piled on humiliation, but I survived. Not because anyone helped me. Not really. I survived because I started noticing, learning, and preparing. Ryan thought he had won. Everyone else thought I was a shy, awkward new kid who would eventually fade into irrelevance. But I knew the truth, and quietly, with my journal tucked under my pillow and my phone loaded with every embarrassing moment Ryan had orchestrated, I made a vow. I will never let him win. Not now, not ever. And one day, I'll make sure he knows exactly what it feels like to be powerless. And that, friends, was the first step. I used to think high school was the worst it could get during freshman year. Freshman year taught me that pain could be public, humiliation could be orchestrated, and no teacher, or so it seemed, could stop someone like Ryan Mitchell. But sophomore year hit me with a harsh truth. The bullying doesn't stop. It evolves. And so did I. By October, Ryan had moved past the simple shoves and name-calling. He was more calculated now. He would corner me in the hall with his friends around, pretending to be friendly at first, only to spring a snide joke or push me just enough to make me stumble. In classes, he would subtly manipulate group projects to make me look incompetent, or spread rumors that slowly gnawed at my social standing. Each incident was sharper than the last, but somewhere inside me, a different part of Ethan began to wake up, the part that refused to stay silent. It started small. I noticed patterns, like I had last year, but this time I acted. I wasn't trying to punch back physically. That would have been stupid. Instead, I observed, memorized, and predicted. Ryan was arrogant, sure, but predictable in the way only cocky people are. He believed people feared him, that no one could challenge him. He assumed that once you accepted your role as a loser, you stayed there. But I wasn't accepting that role anymore. The first time I fought back subtly, I almost didn't believe it worked. During a group assignment in biology, Ryan tried to hijack the project, claiming he had done all the work while I had supposedly done nothing. Normally, I would have stayed quiet, terrified of confrontation, but I'd been keeping careful notes of every single interaction. What he said, what he claimed, what our peers actually contributed. So I calmly presented the evidence. Timestamps from shared documents, screenshots of messages he sent, even my own meticulous notes. The class sat in stunned silence. Ryan's smug grin faltered, then came back, but this time it was forced, shaky. He tried to argue, but it was useless. I wasn't loud or aggressive, I was precise. For the first time, people started to notice. Whispers replaced smirks. I could feel the social tide shifting just a little. Not enough to topple Ryan, but enough that I knew I wasn't invisible anymore. Emboldened, I began testing other small victories. Nothing drastic at first, just tiny pranks, clever manipulations that wouldn't get me in trouble, but would shake his confidence. I swapped his red pen with a blue one, right before a test he was boasting about. I left his favorite energy drink missing in the cafeteria right when he expected it. I even convinced a few classmates to accidentally misplace his backpack. Each small success felt like a spark, proof that Ryan wasn't untouchable. More importantly, these victories did something unexpected. They changed me. I realized that revenge wasn't about lashing out, it was about strategy, about being smarter, calmer, and more patient. Justice, I realized, could be quiet, precise, and inevitable, whereas revenge was messy, impulsive, and fleeting. I wanted the kind of satisfaction that lingered, that made him think twice before ever underestimating anyone again. Socially, I started to build my own allies. I wasn't exactly the popular kid yet, but I learned how to talk to people, how to make genuine connections. A group of students who had been quietly frustrated with Ryan's bullying started to notice my subtle wins. They didn't come out and declare themselves my friends openly. High school doesn't work that way, but they gave me glances that said, "We see you and we know what he's doing." Even small social acknowledgement mattered. It was like slowly constructing a fortress around myself, brick by brick. Ryan noticed, of course. That was part of the fun. His arrogance remained, but cracks started showing. He tried to predict my reactions, to manipulate me again, and every time I responded logically or strategically instead of emotionally, his plan faltered. The look on his face when I outmaneuvered him quietly in front of his friends, without raising my voice or calling attention, was priceless. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about him realizing that the rules weren't all in his favor. At home, I kept documenting everything. My notebook grew thicker. Videos, messages, notes, timelines. It became a treasure trove for later use. I knew I wanted more than petty victories. I wanted a clean, complete win. The kind that would matter long after high school. That meant waiting, planning, and thinking ahead. College applications came around, and I realized that my revenge, or justice, wasn't confined to the halls of Jefferson High. I could set things in motion that would follow him subtly while I built my own life and skills. The turning point for me, emotionally, came in March during the spring carnival. Ryan tried his usual humiliation, tripped me in front of a crowd during a relay race. I stumbled, yes, but this time I didn't panic. I laughed out loud. I made a joke at my own expense. And then, subtly, I turned the situation around. I complimented the teammate Ryan had been trying to undermine. I pointed out a funny, harmless mistake Ryan himself had made that everyone noticed. The gym erupted in laughter, but this time it wasn't just at me. People laughed with me, not at me. The crowd shifted. Ryan's position, even if momentarily, cracked. After that day, I noticed more people listening to me, more people willing to stand on the sidelines if Ryan tried his tricks, not openly defying him, but quietly choosing not to play his game. My confidence grew. My plans became more ambitious. I started thinking long term. Each small prank, each clever retort, each strategic move wasn't just for survival, it was training for the bigger victory I intended to claim once I left high school. By the end of junior year, I had learned to anticipate Ryan's moves, to turn his arrogance against him, and to protect myself socially without escalating to violence. The boy who once made me tremble with fear in the hallway became predictable, manipulable, and ultimately, a lesson in strategy. Every laugh he tried to orchestrate at my expense was cataloged, analyzed, and turned into fuel. Yet, I had to remind myself constantly, this wasn't about being cruel. I wasn't trying to hurt him for the sake of hurting him. I was learning the difference between revenge and justice, between petty payback and meaningful, satisfying triumph. Every small victory made me smarter, stronger, and more in control, not just of him, but of myself. Senior year rolled around, and with it came college applications. I had spent hours crafting essays, improving grades, and strategizing extracurriculars, all while quietly observing Ryan from afar. He was still the cocky jock everyone thought would take over the world, still unaware of the slow, quiet transformation I had undergone. And I knew, deep down, that the game I had been playing for 2 years would reach its climax after high school, but only when I was ready. Graduation day came. Ryan strutted across the stage with his usual swagger, thinking he'd won high school, while I walked a little taller, head held high, heart steady. I had survived, I had learned, I had prepared, and the best part? He didn't even know it yet, but the next chapter of the game would be mine. I looked back at the school one last time before tossing my cap into the air. The same place that had humiliated me, terrorized me, and tested me, had also taught me everything I needed to know. Every shove, every insult, every cruel joke had been data, experience, and fuel. I was no longer the scared freshman who had walked in on day one. I was a strategist, a planner, and most importantly, I was ready. And so I left Jefferson High with a quiet promise to myself. Ryan Mitchell might think he'd won, but the real game was only just beginning. College was a fresh start, or at least that's what everyone said. Me, I had mixed feelings. Jefferson High was behind me, but shadows have a way of following you, even when you think you've left them in the past. I was 18, newly 18, stepping into campus life with the confidence I had built over the last 2 years, friends I actually trusted, grades that reflected my work ethic, and a sense of strategy that had been honed through the years of dealing with Ryan Mitchell. And of course, Ryan Mitchell had followed me. Not literally, but close enough. He wasn't the same high school tyrant anymore. He'd grown into a college jock, broad-shouldered, wearing that same infuriating grin, now seasoned with arrogance and confidence that somehow made him feel untouchable in a completely different environment. I first saw him in the quad during the first week of classes. He was showing off to some girls, flexing for attention, effortlessly commanding space. My first instinct was to feel the old nervousness, the old fear, but then I remembered how I survived high school. I had changed, I had learned, and I wasn't the same Ethan anymore. I was ready. The first challenge was subtle, observation. Ryan's social habits were still predictable, and I had learned to notice patterns. He still thrived on the reactions of others, still believed his charisma and intimidation were untouchable. The key was to undermine him without being obvious, to chip away at his influence one small move at a time while keeping my moral compass intact. I started by gathering information, not in a creepy, obsessive way, just paying attention. Who were his friends? Who followed his lead? What were his weaknesses? I realized quickly that his arrogance made him careless. He assumed people would always laugh with him, never against him. That's where I could step in. The first test came during a group project in my introductory economics class. Ryan was partnered with the top students of the class and, naturally, he tried to dominate. He made mistakes, small ones, sloppy data entries, missing citations, and no one called him out. That's where I stepped in, quietly and confidently. During a meeting, I pointed out the inconsistencies. Not in a humiliating way, but matter-of-factly, logically, with documentation to back it up. His face flushed, and I swear I saw the briefest flicker of panic. He tried to spin it, tried to charm his way out, but the evidence was clear. It was a small victory, but a sweet one. He didn't even know I had planned it weeks in advance, collecting the tiny errors he left behind. That was the thrill, working in the shadows, controlling the board without anyone realizing it. I wasn't cruel, I was strategic. And each time I pulled something like that off, my confidence grew, along with my subtle reputation for competence. People started noticing, people started trusting my judgment in small ways. Socially, I continued to maneuver quietly. I didn't have to be flashy to be influential. I would sit near Ryan in common areas, start conversations that highlighted his flaws without calling him out directly, and subtly make connections with his circle. I discovered quickly that his friends weren't loyal, they were opportunistic. As soon as Ryan's influence wavered even slightly, they hesitated, and hesitation is the first crack in a bully's armor. Then came the small psychological games. I started planting little accidents that made him look careless or overconfident. A misplaced textbook, a subtly edited group presentation slide, a misdirected email that he took the blame for. Each move was harmless in isolation but cumulative in effect. Ryan noticed something was off. I could see it in his eyes, that faint panic that nobody else could interpret. He started second-guessing himself, wondering why he was losing footing. He didn't suspect me, not yet, and that was perfect. Every night, I documented everything. Not obsessively, just enough to keep track of outcomes and patterns. I still had my journal, still had my phone loaded with evidence, but now it felt different. I wasn't collecting ammunition for revenge anymore. I was refining my strategy, building skills, and observing human behavior in action. College was like a sandbox for everything I had learned during high school, amplified. The tension escalated when Ryan's arrogance began to falter publicly. During a campus mixer, he attempted to dominate a conversation with a group of students, but his attempts fell flat. I subtly redirected attention to a story where he had misrepresented facts. Just a tiny correction, barely noticeable, but it planted doubt. I could see it on his face, confusion, panic, and growing paranoia. That was the beauty of subtlety. You didn't humiliate openly, you made the arrogance implode quietly. One of my favorite moments came during a campus debate in a freshman seminar. Ryan tried to dominate the discussion, interrupting constantly, confident he was the smartest in the room. I didn't confront him directly. Instead, I asked a question that highlighted a logical inconsistency in his argument. The class noticed. He tried to recover, but each attempt made him stumble further. I didn't gloat. I didn't even celebrate internally. I just watched calmly as the inevitable happened, influence slipping. The moral satisfaction was deeper than any revenge could have offered. By the middle of the semester, I realized something important. My strategy wasn't about destroying him. It was about leveling the playing field. High school had taught me that bullies thrive when others feel powerless. College showed me that influence is fluid. People can change perception in their favor if you're clever, patient, and disciplined. And every subtle win made Ryan question himself more. He didn't know it yet, but I had already taken control. There were moments of temptation. I wanted to humiliate him, to replicate the exact fear and shame he had inflicted on me for years. But I reminded myself constantly, this wasn't about vengeance. It was about justice and self-respect. Watching him fumble subtly, watching the cracks in his armor widen was satisfying enough, and it gave me clarity. When the time came for the final confrontation, I wanted it to be undeniable, precise, and complete, not messy or impulsive. Meanwhile, my own life flourished. I built genuine friendships, pursued interests and projects that mattered to me, and developed a reputation for intelligence and reliability. Ryan was still in his world, relying on charm and intimidation, but slowly, his world started to contract. I could feel the social shifts. People began to notice when he was wrong, when he overstepped, and I was always there quietly, subtly, without calling attention to myself. By the end of my sophomore year in college, Ryan was noticeably on edge. I could see it in his interactions, his hesitations, the way he glanced over his shoulder in public spaces. He had no idea I was behind it. No clue that the quiet guy he used to ignore was orchestrating these shifts like a conductor behind a curtain. And that's when I knew I was ready to plan the ultimate move. High school had shaped me, college had sharpened me, and the years of observation, strategy, and small victories had prepared me. The end game wasn't far away. Ryan Mitchell, the guy who had ruled my life with fear and arrogance, was about to face a reckoning, one that would be precise, public, and unforgettable. And the best part? I was calm, confident, ready, patient. The board was set, the pieces in place. Ryan might still think he's untouchable, but he had no idea the storm was coming. I never imagined that 4 years of being careful, patient, and observant would lead to this moment. I was 21, standing in the center of my final college year with a plan meticulously crafted over months. Years, really, ready to unfold. Every detail, every minor victory, every observation I had collected since freshman year was coming together in a way I could never have imagined when I was that nervous, hoodie-wearing freshman at Jefferson High. Ryan Mitchell had followed his usual path. Still cocky, still arrogant, still convinced that charm and bravado would carry him through life. He'd kept up his social jock act, racking up friends, internships, and a seemingly untouchable reputation. But he had underestimated one thing: patience. And the quiet kid he bullied into hiding 4 years ago had grown into someone he couldn't predict. Someone who had learned every weakness, every habit, every small crack in his armor. I first reached out indirectly, using channels Ryan thought were safe: emails, alumni networks, shared student projects. I had quietly built an undeniable paper trail of evidence, showing his manipulations, exaggerations, and missteps. Nothing illegal, nothing unethical, just the truth. Undeniable and organized in a way even his charm couldn't erase. And I had witnesses, peers who had quietly observed, corroborating my evidence without ever realizing they were part of the plan. The day of reckoning came during a college alumni event. It was the perfect stage. Hundreds of students, alumni, and faculty all gathered. Ryan strutted in, looking as confident as ever, shaking hands, telling jokes, and assumed no one had ever really noticed him failing. He didn't know I'd arranged for a digital presentation highlighting, carefully and factually, every manipulation, misrepresentation, and arrogance he had displayed in school projects, campus organizations, and internships. I stayed calm as the event began, my nerves replaced by the kind of focus that comes from years of planning. People mingled, laughed, and congratulated themselves on networking. Ryan in the center of attention, oblivious to the trap. I waited until the timing was perfect. When I stepped up to speak, I didn't announce it dramatically. I didn't gloat. I simply started with my own story. About learning resilience, about facing challenges, about patience and observation. The room was quiet, and I could feel Ryan shifting, sensing something, but he didn't know what. Then, subtly, I began to present the facts. Not accusations, just undeniable evidence. Timelines, emails, project screenshots, corroborated claims. Each slide revealed missteps he had assumed were invisible. Each fact illustrating arrogance and manipulation he had believed no one noticed. The audience leaned in. Some laughed at the irony, some nodded in recognition, and some, older alumni, looked impressed, goldened by the thoroughness. Ryan's face changed. First, confusion, then panic, then the slow, creeping realization that he couldn't charm his way out. He stammered, tried to joke, tried to redirect attention, but the precision of my presentation left no room for escape. Each point I made was a mirror of the tactics he had used against me, only magnified, undeniable, and delivered with calm confidence rather than anger. I watched him shrink in real time, the jock swagger, the cocky smirk, the aura of untouchability, all dissolving under the weight of evidence. My heart pounded, but it wasn't excitement, it was relief. Relief that the years of bullying, the humiliation, the nights of doubt and fear were finally accounted for. Every small victory I had orchestrated before had led to this cumulative, undeniable impact. It wasn't cruel, I made sure it wasn't. I didn't call him names, I didn't embellish, I didn't attack his character beyond what he had shown publicly. I simply held up a mirror, and the mirror reflected everything he had done to so many people, including me. That, to me, was justice, the kind that doesn't rely on anger, but on truth, patience, and timing. The reaction was electric. People whispered, murmured, and shared glances. Some laughed quietly. Some shook their heads in disbelief. And Ryan tried to recover. He stammered, pointed to someone else in the audience, tried to blame circumstances, tried to charm his way out. But the room no longer trusted him. His carefully constructed social persona collapsed in minutes. The arrogance that had once protected him was now the very thing that exposed him. And as I watched, I realized something more important than victory: freedom. For the first time in years, I felt free from his shadow, free from the fear, the anxiety, the constant calculation of how to survive another day. I could finally breathe without thinking about who was watching, who was laughing, and who wanted to see me fail. After the presentation, people approached me, not to celebrate Ryan's downfall, but to acknowledge the clarity, intelligence, and perseverance it took to achieve it. I thanked them quietly, keeping my demeanor calm. I didn't want to gloat. Gloating would have cheapened it. The satisfaction came from knowing the truth had been seen, undeniable and public. That was enough. Ryan left the event humiliated but intact physically. He wasn't hurt. He wasn't broken. But socially, emotionally, he had experienced a collapse that mirrored what he had put me through, amplified in subtle ways I had orchestrated. And he knew, deep down, that this wasn't overreaction, luck, or me being mean. It was consequence, the natural, inevitable consequence of arrogance, manipulation, and cruelty. Later that night, I reflected on the journey, from the shy, hoodie-wearing freshman at Jefferson High to the confident, strategic adult I had become. Every challenge, every humiliation, and every sleepless night of planning had been a lesson. I realized the real victory wasn't seeing Ryan falter, it was seeing myself grow. I had learned patience, emotional intelligence, strategy, and the importance of justice over revenge. I didn't need anyone else's acknowledgement. I didn't need applause. I didn't need Ryan to grovel. The satisfaction was internal. I had reclaimed control of my life, and nothing he did could ever take that away. By the end of the night, I stepped outside into the cool air, away from the whispers, the stares, and the remnant of humiliation. I felt lighter, stronger, and wiser. Ryan Mitchell, once the tyrant of my adolescence, was humbled, socially exposed, and forced to reckon with the consequences of his actions. I moved on, not with anger, but with clarity and dignity. And as I walked across campus under the stars, I knew one thing. The person I had become was far more important than any victory over him. Patience, intelligence, and perseverance had been my weapons, and they had served me better than any impulsive act of revenge ever could. I was unbroken, I was free, and I was finally, undeniably in control of my life. All right, that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have so many more amazing stories coming your way, so make sure you hit that subscribe button. Our goal is to reach 100K subscribers by the end of this year, and we'd love for you to be part of this journey. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.